Good evening, I'm Ellen Robertson Green. Welcome. We're broadcasting live tonight from the studios of Panhandle PBS on the campus of Amarillo College. For the next hour, we'll be focusing on 3 Potter County races in the March 1st primary. With us in the studio are the candidates in those races and 6 journalists representing various media sources in our area. Let's begin by introducing the candidates in the order they'll appear on the ballot. In the race for Potter County Precinct 3, we have the incumbent County Commissioner for Precinct 3, Leon Church. Mr. Church is a retired county extension agent who served in 3 states during his 36-year career. He holds 2 degrees, a bachelor's and a master's, both in agriculture from the University of Idaho. Church's opponent is Vince Nowak, who has been practicing law in Texas for 25 years, 23 of those in Amarillo. He received his law degree from Syracuse University. Moving on now to the race for Potter County Attorney. First on the ballot, Amarillo lawyer Lynn Walker, who has practiced law in Texas and New Mexico and in the federal courts for 20 years. He worked as a felony prosecutor for the state of New Mexico and as a trial lawyer in Amarillo. Walker obtained his law degree from the University of Tulsa. And next, incumbent Scott Brumley, who won election to his office in 2004, gaining the support of his departing predecessor, Sonia Letson. He was previously chief of civil litigation for the county and had worked for the office for 8 years. Brumley gained his law degree from Texas Tech University. And in the race for 47th District Attorney, we have Stephen Denny, who has practiced criminal defense law since 2011. Prior to that, he served 7 months as an international narcotics and law enforcement contractor in Afghanistan for the U.S. State Department. From 2006 to 2010, Denny worked as an assistant district attorney for the man he now opposes in this race, Randall Simms. Denny graduated from the Texas Tech School of Law. And next, incumbent Randall Simms, who was first elected in 2004. He previously served as an assistant attorney in the 47th District. He was also chief of criminal cases for the Potter County Attorney's Office and served as the district attorney in Donley County. That's the 100th District. Simms earned his law degree from Texas Tech University. And let's move quickly to introduce our panel of journalists. With us is Karen Welch from Panhandle PBS, Madison Allwell from KFDA, Jackie Kingston from KAMR and Fox 14, Case Wilbanks from KVII and the CW, Paula Duarte Alboran from Telemundo, and Dylan Hunter from KGNC. We asked the Globe News to join us tonight, but they were unable to make it. Before we begin, a reminder to our candidates that this is a forum, not a debate. Each of you will have 1 minute to respond to the questions posed by our journalist, and you will take turns being the first to provide an answer. If you feel the need to respond to something your opponent has said, wait until it's your turn to speak again, and then feel free to use a portion of your time to do just that. We'll begin with the race for Potter County Commissioner Precinct 3. This seat represents portions of Northwest Amarillo, Bushland, River Road, Pleasant Valley, Highland Park, and all the rural areas of Potter County. Mr. Church, we begin with your 1 minute opening statement.
Good evening. I'm Leon Church, Potter County Commissioner from Precinct 3. And I'm running for re-election. I've had the privilege to serve in this capacity for just over 3 years. Prior to my election, I was a county extension agent for agriculture and horticultural programs here in Potter County. I retired in 2008 after a 36-year career with an emeritus status. My background in agriculture and horticulture has demonstrated to me that growth, whether that be plant, animal, or human, means that the organism is healthy. I believe that is true for communities as well. Potter County is growing and is healthy, as evidenced by our AA Standard & Poor credit rating, the highest rating a government entity of our size can receive. This is accomplished not because Potter County is in crisis, but because of sound financial management.
Thank you, Mr. Church. Mr. Nowak, you have 1 minute for an opening statement.
Thank you so much, Ellen. My name is Vince Nowak, and I have had the privilege of living in Potter County for the last 24 years. And I'm going to lay all my cards on the table right now. Amarillo is all I have. I'm your neighbor, and y'all are my neighbor. The fact of the matter is that Potter County's growth has been stagnant since about the 60s. And we need to start budgeting the money that we collect in Potter County the way your family budgets your own money. In other words, what do we collect every year? What are our needs each year? How do we budget for the future and put a little bit aside for a rainy day? I have been privileged to pay taxes for 24 years in this county, and it would be my absolute honor to represent y'all as a family member in Potter County. Thank you so much, Ellen.
Thank you, Mr. Nowak. We will stick with this race as we move to our journalists. Mr. Nowak, you'll answer first this time and again have 1 minute. And the question goes to Karen Welch.
Mr. Nowak, you have criticized your opponent for passing a $21 million building project without first seeking voter approval. My question to both of you is, when should elected representatives make decisions themselves, and when should they put it to a public vote?
I get the first answer? First of all, it's not 21 million, it's 21.5, and it's not really even 21.5, Karen, it's $28.9 million over the length of the certificate of obligation. When should the elected officials make the tough choices, and when should the taxpayers make the choices? That was your question. This is the single largest debt Potter County has ever incurred. That debt should have gone to the voters to say yay or nay. And by way of example, that's what happened in Randall County a couple years ago. When they wanted to build a new jail and a new sheriff's administration, the Randall County elected officials went out and they campaigned and they convinced their people that this is the best way to spend our money. That is not happening in Potter County. We need a little bit more transparency. The two meetings we had on this spending, one was the day after Thanksgiving, the other was a meeting that was scheduled and then rescheduled. We need our elected officials to be out there telling the people this is how we're spending our money, and let them have a vote. Thank you, Ellen.
Okay, Mr. Church, it's your turn.
State statutes allow counties to borrow money in basically two ways. One is with certificates of obligation, and that is the procedure that we used for this particular project. The $21.5 million is the amount of money that we borrowed. Now we can argue about the $28 million. Of course, that's over a 20-year period of which this loan is taken. Nobody discusses that. When you go buy a house for $150,000, you don't say, because I'm paying interest, I paid $300,000 for it. So anyway, that's kind of a little bit misleading, but we did have citizens on our committee that came up with this plan. We had 2 public hearings, and so the citizens were involved in this decision.
Thank you, Mr. Church. And now Madison Alwell has the next question, and Mr. Church will answer first.
My question for both of you, there's been some concerns about how taxpayer dollars have been spent. In the coming year, what areas in Potter County do you think taxpayer dollars need to be spent on?
Okay, of course, I have been a champion of our fire and rescue department, and 4 years ago that was the issue that I ran on, and during these last 3 years we've been able to purchase 5 new fire engines, 2 with grant funds, and so I want to continue to look at our fire department for additional spending because the importance it is to our county and the area that we represent. Just last weekend we had a huge wildfire, and luckily we had some of the equipment that we purchased, and we'll be looking at that. And of course, public safety is number 1 on our list of areas that we need to keep in mind.
Okay, Mr. Knight.
The wildfire last weekend was just north of my house. And just prior to that, 2 days prior to that, I visited with Chief Lake, our chief of our volunteer fire department, and they do need help. My opponent earlier said that nobody talks about the $28.9 million when talking about the $21.5 million for the Sheriff's Administration Office. That's the problem. We ought to be talking about the $28.9 million. And let's be honest here. We are in a county that does not have a lot of room left to shoulder more tax burden. If we are going to go out on a limb and leverage ourselves, go into debt to this amount to benefit the county, it ought not be for an office building. It ought to be like what Leon just said. It ought to be for our fire department. So instead of floating a $21.5 million certificate of obligation, why not try $5 million for our volunteer fire departments? Give them new engines, give them a new office, give them a new station, and help them. Because right now we are in a tinderbox in Potter County.
Jackie
We need to
King-
help our fire department.
Jackie Kingston, your question goes to Mr. Nowak.
Good evening to you both. Mr. Nowak, we'll continue to talk about taxes. I know you're a strong opponent of raising any tax rate. What are some other ideas that either of you would bring to the table? What are some other ways of incurring some income so that we can grow our county?
Well, first of all, our county hasn't grown much since the 60s. And so it's not so much how we can grow our economy, because the city of Amarillo is doing its best to grow our economy downtown. And everyone in this room knows that I am an advocate against putting all our money downtown. I'd rather see our money be spread out among the entire city and, frankly, selfishly, in my county. I think the better question is, how do we cut money out of the budget that we're already spending? And the way we cut money out of the budget that we're already spending is focusing on our jail. Judge Tanner right now just implemented a mental health court docket, which is going to defer about 30% of the people in the jail that are mentally ill to services that we offer and get them off of our tax rolls in terms of spending $57 a day to keep them in jail. Number one. Number two, cite and release. Since 2007, our law enforcement has had an opportunity to issue cite and release tickets rather than put people in jail. Every time we don't put someone in jail, we don't spend the money to room and board them, number one. Number
Mr.
two,
Nowak.
they also get to keep their jobs, keep paying their mortgage, keep paying their rent.
Mr. Church, your turn
Thank
to
you.
respond.
Thank you. The question was, how else would we raise some money? A lot of people don't understand that counties are pretty well limited on how that we can raise funds. Property taxes is our major way of raising funds for the county. Secondly, we do have another option that we actually tried in 2014, and that's a county assistance district. We tried to establish that, take that to the voters. What that would do is increase the sales tax out in the county to the same level that they pay in the city. The county level outside city limits is 6.25%. Inside the city limits, it's 8.25%. With that money, we estimated we could bring in another $500,000 a year, and that was designated for the fire department, but unfortunately that particular issue failed.
Okay, we're moving to Case Will Banks, who has his question. We'll go to Mr. Church first.
In regard to the taxing entities that you just mentioned, such as the city and the school, how will you work with those entities to make sure that with any tax increase that may come, taxpayers aren't overwhelmed with all of those entities?
Well, I don't think anybody wants to raise taxes, and if I've been labeled as someone that wants to raise taxes, I think that's false. Over the 3 years that I have been a county commissioner, first year we needed to raise taxes 1 cent. Second year we did not raise any taxes. Third year, this last year we raised by 3 cents. And that was because of mandates that came down from the federal government and the state government. And sometimes every budget year we have to look at what's needed, what we're mandated to do, and then carry out the budget in the best way we can.
Mr. Nowak.
I think the question was, how do we not overwhelm our taxpayers? That's in the rearview mirror. We have already overwhelmed our taxpayers. A moment ago, my opponent said that the question is, how do we raise more money? I don't think that's the question. It's not how do we raise more money. It's how do we more wisely spend the money we already have. And with respect to the county assistant district, which would have raised $500,000 in my part of rural Potter County, I voted in favor of that. And it should have passed because we would have been on level with the city. I'll tell you why it didn't pass. It didn't pass because just prior to that, our county had given Coke an $810,000 tax abatement that was not necessary. We cannot give away close to $1 million and then go back to the taxpayer and say, now we need more. It's time. We're already overwhelmed in taxes in Potter
Mr.
County.
Nowak.
It is time to spend
Mr.
our money
Nowak.
more wisely. Thank you, Ellen.
Paula, your question goes to Mr. Nowak first.
Mr. Nowak, you were mentioning about you will advocate for a cite and release policy. And don't you think you're a little bit soft on crime?
If it'll be what?
Don't you think you're a little bit soft on crime?
If you had a razor blade right now and cut my wrist, I would bleed blue, because my hero in my life was my father, who was a lifelong cop. I'm not soft on crime. What I'm tough on is not wasting money. And there are people that are arrested in certain classifications of misdemeanors that do not need my room and board in a jail. I would rather have those people out there living their lives, going to work, supporting their families, paying their taxes, and oh, by the way, they're still arrested on a cite and release, paying their punishment for their crimes. I don't think that it is smart business to put people in jail that could otherwise be out working, doing community service, and paying their fines to the county. It's time we got smart with how we punish people. And punishing people by putting them in jail where they don't need to be, and it's just going to add to our tax burden, is not smart.
Mr. Church.
If I have to err, I'm going to err on the side of public safety. And so this seems to be a theme in this campaign, to be easy on crime. And I think it's trying to soften us up so we can get a little more, maybe even introduce legalization of marijuana. I don't know what it is, but I'd like to go back to the question on abatement. Abatements are probably one of the most conservative ideas that we have, that we can do. All we're doing with an abatement is letting the business, whether that's $1 million corporation or whatever, keep their own tax money to reinvest into their business so that it'll be successful and help the economy of our community.
Okay, thank you. Dylan, your question, and it goes to Mr. Church first.
Commissioner Church, we've heard stagnant financial growth, the single largest debt Potter County has ever had, transparency, and no room for more tax burden. Wrapping that all into one big package, where do you see the absolute most critical need for change, not only in Precinct 3, but in Potter County as a whole, and how do we make it happen?
Well, first of all, I disagree with the statement that we're stagnant. Potter County has been growing at an average of 1% a year, and this has been growing for many years. Our property evaluations over the years have been growing. So to say that we're a stagnant economy, a stagnant population, I think that's really a misrepresentation of what Potter County is. We all have to be careful of spending, and I think there isn't a person on the Potter County Commissioner's Court that isn't. Our department heads, wonderful bunch of people that are doing a great job for the county, watching every penny turn back between $2 and $3 million a year into the general fund, and to say that we're stagnant, that we're wasting money is just untrue.
Time. I think we have enough time to do one more question.
Do I not take it?
Oh, I am so sorry. Go ahead. I am so sorry, Mr. Nowak.
Yeah, 1% growth a year is stagnant, number one. Number two, going back to this abatement issue, I agree that it's conservative to let people keep their own tax money. I don't believe it's conservative to give Coke $810,000 tax abatement, which could have funded 2 fire engines in our county, when Coke did not meet our abatement criteria. When Coke showed up that day in court and would refuse to answer a question, Coke, is this a deal breaker? The city, remember, the city had just given Coke $9.1 million to move and relocate out east of town. Then they came to the county and said, how about $810,000 more? I advocated against that. And the argument on the other side is that $810,000 is just a small part of our budget. My personal taxes in Potter County every year are about $3,500. That's minuscule. If Coke gets an abatement, I want an abatement, but that is not how it works. Your question is, what is the critical change we need?
Time, Mr. Nowak.
We need to treat everyone.
You have 30 seconds to do closing, Mr. Nowak. You have time. Okay, well, I'm sorry for not giving you your 1 minute, but now we're going to move on to the 30-second closing statements. And so since Mr. Church was first, Mr. Nowak will be first this time in a 30-second closing statement.
we need to budget our county the way we budget our families. We know what we make each year. All of y'all know what you make each year. You pay for what you absolutely need. You budget for your future needs, and then you put some away for a rainy day, maybe a vacation, maybe something fun. It's time that our county understood that we cannot afford just a little bit more, just a little bit more, just a little bit more each year, because we're to the point where we can't afford just a little bit more. It's not time for more taxes, it's time for smarter
Mr.
spending.
Nowak,
Thank
please,
you, Ellen.
time. Mr. Church, 30 seconds.
I've worked hard over the last 3 years to gain your trust and support in helping manage the Potter County government. The current Potter County Commissioners Court is one of the most functional courts this county has had for a long, long time. We have differences, of course, of opinion, but we move forward for the good of the county. I ask for your vote for re-election as Potter County Commissioner, Precinct 3.
Okay, thank you. Moving to the race now for Potter County Attorney. This office prosecutes adults charged with misdemeanor criminal offenses, child welfare, and family law cases. It also advises county commissioners and other elected officials and department heads on legal matters. Lynn Walker, you have 1 minute to make an opening statement.
Well, good evening, and it's a great pleasure to be here tonight. It's been almost 25 years since I was in this building last. I used to teach database programming upstairs, but just before I went to law school. My wife Tracy and I are from Amarillo. We came back to Amarillo. During my career as an attorney, I took 7 years off to prosecute violent crimes over in New Mexico, and but we've been back since '05, and we've decided to stay here. Our kids finished going through school and being raised here. Our daughter lives here, and our son's not with us right now, but he's serving in the Navy. And the question that's on everybody's mind is, why do I want to run for this office? I believe that I can use my experience as a leader throughout my life, and especially throughout my legal career and my criminal trial experience, to get the office of county attorney back on track. Turn it back into a winning office and give good advice to the county commissioners that will help get this county moved forward. And that's what I intend to do.
Thank you. Scott Brumley, you have 1 minute to make an opening statement.
Thank you. My name's Scott Brumley. I've been privileged for the last 11 years to serve as county attorney of Potter County. During that time, I've led an office of 30 people who have diligently and professionally sought justice in criminal cases and protected taxpayers from civil liability. That's conservatism in action, and that's what I intend to continue bringing. I know how to lead an office that resolves 99% of its criminal cases before trial, saving taxpayer money, effectively reaching the right result in cases, and securing convictions in the vast majority of the cases we handle. I also know what the office can do, such as giving legal advice when it's requested, and what the office cannot do, such as setting the tax rate or strong-arming the Commissioner's Court when they're exercising their duty to do so. I intend to continue bringing that limited approach to government to the office rather than expanding the office beyond its legal boundaries. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're back to Karen Welch, who has the first question in this race as well, just because we've made the rounds. You'll begin with your question, and it goes to Scott Brumley first.
Mr. Brumley, your opponent has campaigned on cutting taxes, and you've said and made the point that your office isn't involved in setting the tax rate. How would you and your department make an impact in reducing that rate?
Well, certainly we can always look for ways to reduce expenses within the criminal justice system. Our office, per se, remains within budget every year. We look for ways to save money there, and we always come in under budget. So to that end, we continue to do the work of reducing taxes within our authority. We certainly are always looking for ways to reduce expenditures in law enforcement, but at the same time, we're mindful of our obligation to protect public safety. That is the overarching mission of the office. And I'm not willing to cut taxes or cut expenditures or cut programs that jeopardize public safety.
Mr. Walker.
Unlike my opponent, Mr. Brumley, I'm going to be proactive in the office. And we need to initiate several things to get office and office-related duties cut down so that it is less of a burden on the county. For instance, we can cut down on taxes if we cut down on our costs. As it was discussed earlier between Mr. Church and Mr. Nowak, one of the things that we can do is that we can evaluate our jail and implement new procedures there to cut down on its overall cost. It is a massive cost that is presented to this county. Cite and release will do that. A good pretrial release system will do that. Processing the mentally ill out of that facility as soon as possible will get that done as well. So I can be proactive and initiate programs. Mr. Brumley, in the entire time that he's been there, has never initiated a single program. I will, and I will get those costs down, and that will, in turn, help get our taxes down.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're moving to Madison Allwell, and again, Lynn Walker has gets to respond first.
Where do you both stand on implementing a possible cite and release here in Potter County?
Well, I have straight up asked Mr. Brumley what his intention was, and he has consistently said that it's up to the discretion of law enforcement. The position of county attorney is the chief law enforcement officer of that county. And it is up to that chief law enforcement officer to set the policies and goals for the county. Now, I don't intend to go out and strong arm the Amarillo Police Department or the Sheriff's Department. I don't think that'll be necessary. I think that if they will sit back and take a good, solid, respectful look at cite and release, they will understand the purpose of the program. It is not intended to let violent people go. As I said, I have a lot of experience in putting violent people in prison. Violent people make a decision not to be with us. They make a decision to be in jail. That's where they belong. But people with trespass, criminal mischief, small amounts of marijuana, who are residents here, they don't necessarily need to be held up prior to them being convicted in a court. So we need to use cite and release. It will cut probably somewhere between $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 out of our costs.
And Scott Brumley.
Thank you. First of all, you have to be true to what the law itself says. Article 14.06 of the Code of Criminal Procedure is the provision that authorizes cite and release. It does not authorize cite and release for criminal trespass. For the other offenses, it has always been our position that if an officer chooses to exercise their discretion to cite and release, we will honor that and do everything within our power to process the case appropriately. But we are not in favor of removing that discretion from the officer in the field who is in the best position to understand whether a defendant is a proper risk to return to court if not compelled to do so by arrest. You also have to consider other factors like who's going to watch these people while they're out on release, who's going to track them down when they don't come back to court, and how much is that going to cost? And if we're not sending them to jail, how are we not creating a misdemeanor sanctuary community?
Thank you. Jackie Kingston has our next question, and it goes to you first, Mr. Brumley.
Mr. Brumley, Mr. Walker, good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. I'd like to talk about guns, gentlemen. I know in a recent blog post purportedly written on your site, Mr. Walker, you accused your opponent, Mr. Brumley, of being anti-gun and being soft on guns. I believe that's taken from the most recent decision to not allow open carry in court buildings here in Potter County. I'd like for you to address that. Are you anti-gun? And Mr. Walker, what is it about that that makes you think that your opponent is?
Thank you. The governor's office and the attorney general have spoken on the issue. When they did so, however, they did not look at the legislative history behind the law that deals with whether a courthouse is a weapons-free zone. I have, and a court certainly will. And that legislative history shows a clear intent to make a building where a court is located a weapons-free zone. Why does that matter? Because if you go into a weapons-free zone with a weapon, you stand to be charged with a third-degree felony. And if you take the conviction on that third-degree felony, you lose your ability to own a gun. I don't favor gun control. I don't want anybody taking my guns away, and I don't want any law-abiding gun owner losing their guns either. What I do want to do is protect law-abiding gun owners from political candidates playing with their Second Amendment rights to peel off a few votes. That is standing up for the Second Amendment.
Mr. Walker?
Well, it's an interesting response by Mr. Brumley. And the one he wants to say that he doesn't want to take away any Second Amendment rights, but then he does exactly that. The governor said and the attorney general said that in multi-purpose government buildings, licensed carry holders should be allowed to bring their weapons into those buildings. Now, no one has ever suggested that they should be allowed to bring their weapons into a courtroom. That would be absurd. I went to the commissioners' meeting that day, and I heard Mr. Brumley and his chief civil person, Dave Kemp, give that advice, the specific advice, that they knew more And they knew better. They knew the law better than the Attorney General of the state of Texas, with their vast resources and incredible smart young people that get of recent graduates. So I find that appalling at first. But I asked them, I said, did anybody even consider just putting in a few lock boxes? Because after all, this entire issue is going to come up 2 or 3 times a year. But not having any lock boxes, not considering any alternatives at all, they just said, nope, we're going to ban them completely. Now that puts
Mr.
us
Walker,
at risk
that's
of
time.
fines, and that's what they've done.
Okay, now we're going to Case Will Banks, and your question will go to Mr. Walker first.
In your opinion of the current state of the county, what should be the main focus of the county attorney or the biggest issue facing the county attorney, either the commissioner's court or the criminal side of the office, and why?
I've got to wrap up the other one just briefly. When you restrict someone's authorized use to carry their weapons by licensed carry holders, you have in fact restricted their rights. Mr. Brumley did that. That's done. Now, to your issue, the thing is that the criminal prosecution rate has always been bad at Potter County. When Mr. Brumley took office, it was running around 54% for the first 5 years, but that was because they had some experienced attorneys there. Now, they left, and in the last 5 years, it has gone down to a 56% loss rate. That's below 50%, okay, as in losing. And no business can operate that way. The state average is 77% win rate. I will set as a goal, minimum goal, 80%. And we got to get that back on track because, as you know, we're now listed as the 5th most violent city in the state of Texas. This isn't helping things. And we've got to start winning cases again. And I will get experienced prosecutors in there that are motivated to do their job and get that job done.
Mr. Brumley.
Thank you. With regard to the 5th most dangerous city issue, of course, the index crimes are all felonies. So that's a bit of snake oil you're being sold there. Whatever our trial statistics are, they are what they are. The county clerk's records actually show us winning more cases than losing over the last 5 years. There's a discrepancy between those and the Office of Court Administration. But regardless of what they are, the only way you assure a high win rate at trial is to cherry pick your easy cases, take those to trial, and ditch the hard cases. We don't do that. We take the hard cases to trial. But I would point out that it is interesting to see a focus on trial statistics from my opponent, who has tried a grand total of 1 case against our office and lost. Now, if we're that bad and you still can't beat us, how are you going to improve us?
Okay. Ms. Duarte Alvaron, your question goes to Scott Brumley first.
Mr. Brumley, do you think that is the Potter County Attorney's Office serving the public efficiently? And what do you think has to be changed?
I do believe that the county attorney's office is serving the public efficiently. There are always ways to improve. In any human endeavor, there are ways to improve. My focus will be using technology to improve our case intake process, our case review process, our discovery process with defense counsel, as well as our trial process. And, of course, we want to continue to focus improving our abilities in successfully prosecuting tough cases like DWI, like domestic violence assault, like crimes that involve people harassing others. Any way we can come up with to improve our performance in that regard, and that is not to say that our lawyers aren't doing a standout professional job. They are, but we always stand to get better. But I think technology is going to be the key, and focusing on our mission.
Mr. Walker.
Technology is not going to be the key. Good, solid, basic trial skills are going to be the key, Scott. And let's talk about that one loss. Is it really a loss when my offer from Mr. Brumley's office, my client had no trial, no crime history at all. 4 months in jail was the offer. 4 months. Now, he had a BAC. It was a DWI case, and it was bad. It was like 0.23. It was very high. I told him, I said, we go to trial, we're going to lose. But is it a loss when I got him straight probation from the court and he didn't go to 4 months in jail? Things had to be placed into context, just like his subordinate who was down there and had to excuse himself from the courtroom 2 times to go upstairs and ask someone how to do his job. It was embarrassing. Technology is not the answer. Good basic trial skills are needed in there. The institutional knowledge that had been gained is lost. It must be rebuilt up from the ground up. I will get that done.
We're moving on to Dylan Hunter from KGNC, and your question goes to Mr. Walker first.
Mr. Walker, we've heard a lot about cite and release and how it cuts costs. What we haven't heard about yet this evening is the alarmingly high recidivism rate, not only in Texas, but at the national level. And my question has to do with alternative sentencing, and I want you to speak to how alternative sentencing programs can help improve the alarmingly high recidivism rate in Texas.
I think that you have got to improve the probation system itself. As I said earlier, some people, by their own acts, they choose to not be among us in society. If they're going to be violent, they need to be in jail. But most people are given a break or given a chance at some point, and they get placed on probation. One of the very best ways to do that, in my opinion, is to install a good community supervision system that has and many components in it, such as drug courts at every possible level, different reporting times for them, and more reporting times perhaps with their supervising officer. Perhaps we need more officers. We've got to get them motivated to get back into the workforce and not repeat the behavior that they've done in the past. And it's almost always drugs and alcohol. But those are the things that we've got to do, or they will repeat.
Mr. Brumley.
Thank you. Various studies suggest that as many as 30 to 50% of people who are incarcerated at any given time are suffering from an identifiable mental health need. That's why I'm enthusiastic about participating in the mental health diversion docket that we are undertaking in Potter County. And I think that recidivism rates, while not exclusively tied to mental health issues, are largely intertwined in them. And the sooner we can divert particularly nonviolent offenders into receiving mental health care rather than sitting in a jail cell, the sooner we may begin to see some positive effect on recidivism rates. I don't disagree that drug courts and other specialized court programs are appropriate, and I would like to see those expand in the future in Potter County as well.
We have time enough for one quick question if Karen Welch can ask it, and if you two can answer yours in 30 seconds instead of a minute this time. Okay, Karen?
Yes. If high employee turnover is a problem for the county attorney's office, explain why and how you would fix the situation.
Well, the nature of the office is that lawyers come to our office to get experience and then they move on to try felonies. And if you're going to fix that, there's basically one answer, and that's money. And how you're going to cut waste and taxes on the one hand and reduce turnover, which takes paying people more money, is enigmatic, to say the least.
Mr. Walker, 30 seconds.
The people that have left that office have told me that what they also want is they want direction and they want some motivating factors. It's not just money. People that want to explore prosecution will stay there, and if you give them the right motivation, they will stay there and they want to do the right thing. It's not just about money. But the turnover rate, it is unbelievably high. I asked for that under a letter on January 8th. I have yet to get the answer from Mr. Brumley. He will not tell me exactly what it is. I believe it's between 50 and 100% on the criminal side.
Okay. Time for 30-second closing statements. Mr. Brumley, you'll begin.
Thank you. All the conservative sounding buzzwords in the world are no substitute for real experience leading professionals in seeking justice in criminal cases and protecting the taxpayers from liability in civil cases. That is true conservatism in action. It's not some hollow campaign promise. I intend to continue to put that practice to work, and I intend to keep the office subject to the constitutional concept of separation of powers rather than invading the Commissioner's Court's province or making bold promises about that. Thank you.
Mr. Walker.
I'm running against a person that has never had an opponent. He was appointed 10 plus years ago. No attorney I know can remember a single year in which Mr. Brumley entered a courtroom. He's got us showing a commercial with him in a courtroom now, which is actually kind of funny among the bar. If you do not know what you're doing in a courtroom, you can't train other people to do it. And the other thing I won't do is I won't go on 8 or 9 trips a year around the state of Texas lecturing. I'll be in that office and I'll be working every day for the citizens of Potter County.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. In the race for the 47th District Attorney, this is the person who serves as the top prosecutor for both Potter and Armstrong counties. First, with an opening statement, is Stephen Denny. 1 minute, please, Mr. Denny.
Thanks, Ellen. My name is Steve Denny. I'm running for 47th DA because we deserve better. I grew up here. I was born here. I went to school here. My family lives here. My parents live here. My wife teaches at Amarillo High. And my son Grant, who has type 1 diabetes, goes to school here as well. I can't pass up an opportunity to say that if you notice your child with constant thirst, night terrors, wetting the bed, that sort of thing, please go have them checked out. It's sometimes something that medical professionals miss, and it's a real easy test, and you'll save their life if they do that. So that's my public service announcement for that part. But I think we can do better. There's been a huge turnover rate in the DA's office. There's been a lot of people go through that office that I think probably wouldn't have gone on for more money if they had a more satisfying work environment. That'll lead to reduced taxes, reduced waste, and a better environment for everybody in the county.
Thank you. Mr. Simms, your 1 minute opening statement.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Randall Simms, your 47th District Attorney. My wife Donna works for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I was raised in Wellington, Texas, working on our ranch. There I learned to do the right thing, work hard, and use your common sense. I went to West Texas State University and graduated from Texas Tech School of Law. There, 30 years ago, I made a decision to become a career prosecutor so I could help others. I've done that for 24 years in Potter County. I've done it for 19 in the 47th District. In the last 11 years as your district attorney, where our office has shown excellent results among the top in the state of Texas. Theodore Roosevelt said, far and away, the best prize in life is to have the chance to work hard. It's work worth doing. I've had that opportunity, and I ask for your vote so I can continue to work hard at the work that is worth doing.
Thank you. Madison Allwell, you have the first question of these gentlemen, and we're going to start with Mr. Simms. 1 minute.
Do you both think a pretrial release system could work for the 47th District?
Pretrial release would have to, the felonies are the worst of the worst. Property crimes, millions of dollars get lost in Amarillo through property crimes. So who are you going to do those to is the question. We have a pretrial release program when we need it to use it. But then you have the issue of reoffenders when they get out. You have the issue of, for example, the city has 16,000 defendants outstanding on 38,000 warrants approximately. So are you willing to let a theft person out so they can go reoffend? Who are you going to be willing to let out that's not going to be controlled by someone like a bondsman to make sure he appears back in court? That's the big question.
Mr. Denny.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the core misunderstanding is what a pretrial release system is. I've worked with that in Lubbock, and what it is, if you are indigent and you request a court-appointed lawyer and you are able to make a bond, and sometimes a reduced bond, you go into the pretrial services system. You report once a week to a probation officer. You are subject to GPS monitoring if that's appropriate. You go to substance abuse counseling and alcohol counseling and AA, NA meetings, and you get help. And all the while, you keep your job. You're there to help your family. You get to pay court costs and fines. You make payments every week towards that so that the county doesn't have to foot that bill. And you keep people in the community. When you take people out of the community, you cause problems. You know, we spend a lot of money on incarcerating people, and then we put them on probation. If you hear the statistics on pleas, most of those pleas are probation. Why don't we get them on that system early?
Thank you. Jackie Kingston, you have the next question. It goes to Mr. Denny first.
Good evening, Mr. Simms, Mr. Denny. I'd like to ask you about the turnover rate in the 47th District Attorney's office. It's already been mentioned tonight several times. Do you find that to be a negative or a positive for the county? And Mr. Denny, I'm especially interested to hear your opinion as you've worked in that office before.
I did. I worked there for 4 years, from 2006 to 2010. 30 attorneys since Randall has taken office have gone through that office, and 19 other employees. With them, they took our training and our experience that we gave them. They've taken experience of the office. They mentioned that there's 300 years of combined experience. Well, just by matriculation over the last 11 years, that number should be 400 and something years of experience for those people. Whenever your experience walks out the door, whether it be for more money or a better work environment or because they wanted to be a missionary in India, that experience is leaving. And I think if you're not being proactive and looking for the reasons they're leaving, you're never going to stop the flood of attorneys hemorrhaging out of that office. If you don't stop the hemorrhaging of those attorneys, you're never going to improve the quality of the product we're giving the taxpayers. And that's what we have to do. You have to identify it. I've worked there. It's not just money that's making people leave.
Mr. Simms.
He hasn't worked there for over 5 years. He's got no idea what the office is like now at this current time. Secondly, I don't know how you're going to improve on some of the best stats in the state of Texas, and that's what we've got over the whole 11 years, without question. The other thing, I'll have to kind of defer to what Scott said. If my people are so bad, then how come we've beat him the 4 times he has gone to jury trial? 3 of them got maximum sentences, and the other one got 60 years. We've got good people up there doing good work, and no matter how many times he wants to ignore those facts, it does not change those facts.
Okay, we're moving on to Case Wilbanks, and Case, your question will go to Mr. Simms first.
Upon winning the race, if you are to, what initiatives or projects will you bring to the district attorney's office, and how do you intend to pay for them?
Glad you asked that question. I'm going to start a trial academy for the DA's office. I've already got the stuff put together. Some things I've done already. We've got a drug court that we're doing. We've got a reentry court that we're doing. We've got a mental health court now that we're trying to do and address people with. We've got when I saw that auto burglaries and thefts were an issue, we're #1 in the state nearly every month for those. I got a grant and got auto theft task force started. I was a key person on that. I'm driving the train on getting the domestic violence initiative that just started a couple of weeks ago, so we're going to do something about domestic violence in Potter County. I've used grants for money, I've used asset forfeiture money for that, and those are the sort of things that we're going to do, and that's how we're going to handle it.
Mr. Denny.
Briefly on the last question, I want to address the trial issue. When I was a prosecutor, I lost 1 case, and I can tell you exactly why. There's not time here. As a defense attorney, I'm supposed to lose. My job is to make sure people follow the rules. And in fact, I did win one of those cases. I beat them in a capital murder case, and they got a not guilty on that, and then he was found guilty of a lesser included offense that I told him they would. As far as programs, many of the programs that he has mentioned were brought up since October 1st when I announced. He's had plenty of time to do those things, and he's only doing those in a reaction to my running. So if I don't win, at least we've spurred him on to do those things. I certainly have plans. I've lined them out on my website in detail. I think a pretrial services system, and I think that improving the quality of the intake, improving the quality of the attorneys is important to that. I also think that if we get a mentoring program between the district attorney and the county attorney, we'll be better able to train those newer attorneys in that office as well.
Okay, we're going to Paula next, and you are going to ask Mr. Denny your question first.
Mr. Denny, Mr. Simms just mentioned about domestic violence. You know, in Amarillo, 2015, most of the homicides were domestic violence related. What are you planning to do to prevent those crimes here in our area?
Well, you know, the problem with preventing those is you have to look at the key demographic on that. And as a defense attorney, many times the victim of those offenses comes into my office. And as much as defense attorneys are painted as really bad guys, the first thing I tell a victim when they're there to come help their abuser is that they don't need to put up with that. They should get out. I'll talk to their whoever their defendant is, and I will defend them the best I could, but they shouldn't put up with that. Nobody should put up with that. But what you find is that this is often a give and take relationship, and so you have to not only focus on the victims, which is what we've been doing before, but you also have to focus on the offender and find out why this argument or why this issue rose to the level where it became violent, and address the offenders, get them into training, get them into classes, and address the offender and not just the victim like we've been doing in the past.
Mr. Simms?
Well, the domestic violence initiative that we're starting, that's one of the main reasons that got started. I want to address something else first. That defendant that we're talking about, that he won the case on, wouldn't plead guilty. So if we were going to try him, we were going to try him for the capital murder. We knew that was going to be tough, but we also knew we were going to get a guilty on the aggravated robbery, and he got 60 years. As for the other things we've done, the drug court, the reentry court, and the mental health court were all started way before he ever said anything about running, as was the grant for the Auto Burglary Theft Task Force. The only thing that has started since then is the Domestic Violence Initiative. We had a standing room only at Amarillo College for the first meeting of that. We had 45 people there for the second follow-up meeting. We've broken down into committees, and then certain people are assigned to do certain things. And we are going to reduce domestic violence by the same program that South Point, North Carolina did, and we're going to do it right here in Potter County.
Time. Mr. Hunter, your question goes to Mr. Simms first.
Mr. Simms, by the numbers, the 47th District Attorney's Office has an 85.5% guilty plea rate. At the other end of the spectrum, it only has an 11% dismissal rate, and both of these numbers are well below state averages. Can they be improved on, and if so, how?
Okay, all right, your question's not quite right. We have 85% pleas. The state average is 71%. We're getting way more guilty pleas than the state average. As far as the dismissal rate, you could double our dismissal rate. You want it low. You could double it, and we would still be below the state average. Our folks up there are doing good jobs of charging the cases properly. They're doing good jobs of trying the cases and getting the appropriate pleas out, so that we can dispose of a vast majority of them without going to court and saving those expenses, as Scott was talking about. We're going to continue to keep on doing those things. We've got the people in there to do it, and I'm very proud of that record. And I think for the 11 years we've done that, we should be very glad that that's happening, and I see no reason, if I'm reelected, why we cannot continue that trend. It was higher, all those weren't that good when I first took office, and we have consistently improved to that point.
Mr. Denny.
I don't want to be above average. I want to be the best. I think that we should be the lowest in the state. As far as working in the office, my opponent brought up that I hadn't been there in 5 years, but I can tell you, 5 years ago, it was almost impossible to get an agreement that get permission to dismiss a case. And that's why that dismissal rate is so low. And I suggest that's why their trial loss rate of 25% last year is so high, because the attorneys are not given the professional latitude, because he's watching that dismissal rate so tightly. You have to give the professional prosecutors in that office that I agree with, some of them are great lawyers, you have to give them the discretion that they deserve to handle cases the way they think. And I've experienced that just in the last year. I have to go to Randall to get permission to dismiss this bad case. One of the cases was on a medical examiner that he wrote a letter about, that the medical examiner was so bad they didn't want him to use him ever again. He made himself a witness trying to push that case through.
Karen Welch has the next question, and it goes to Mr. Denny first.
Mr. Denny, Texas Legislative Committee is currently studying the feasibility of using GPS monitoring and protective orders to help reduce family violence. Where do you stand on that issue?
Well, I think that's a great idea. The probation department already has GPS monitors available to them. And in fact, Potter County had a study several years ago that I think they've now lost and can't find, that said one of the ways to reduce costs in Potter County is to put offenders on GPS monitors. The way that those things work is whenever you put it on, it can tell when you take it off. And so the second that alarms, you go out and you find that offender. That's a great way to know where they're at. If they were committing thefts or domestic violence or any of those sorts of things, that's a great thing to use. There's also alcohol monitors. You can tell if somebody's been drinking. There's a lot of things that we could be using to reduce the pretrial incarceration rate, and we're not doing it, and I think we should. We were recommended to do that several years ago, and we're still not doing it.
Mr. Simms.
I want to go back to just the last question a minute. Under Mr. Denny's rule, a bunch of those good prosecutors that he wouldn't hire because they didn't have 5 years experience wouldn't be in that office. I wouldn't have been hired in the DA's office. As far as the dismissals, we lost 25% of our cases last year. The last 3 cases we lost were aggravated sexual assault of children, the toughest case to try, the toughest on anyone. And we lost them because the jury found them not guilty, but those cases are adult defendants against child victims. Now, as far as the monitoring, as long as they're out, all the monitoring that you do cannot guarantee they're not going to reoffend. We revoke people every week for violating their probation because they've reoffended. There is no guarantee you cannot keep them from reoffending unless you have them locked up or have a bond sufficient enough for the bondsman to track them and make sure to help them not to get reoffend.
Madison Alwell, we can get one more question in if it's a quick question, and if you two gentlemen will 30 seconds each. Mr. Simms, you'll start with the 30-second answer. Madison.
How would you better address prosecuting people with mental illness in the 47th District? Prosecuting people with mental illness.
Mental illness, we're using the mental health court. My office put a policy together for us. I have a lawyer in the office that has been involved with the mental health court in another jurisdiction for 3 years. And we are working, it's a mental health docket now. We are going to turn it into a mental health court. We're working with the VA. That started back in March of this last year. VA came and talked to me. Judge Tanner was on board wanting to do stuff, and we are addressing that. In fact, we sent someone to the mental health facility.
Time, Mr. Simms.
In 3 weeks.
Mr. Denny.
Training, that's the best way. All of my attorneys will be trained to notice and realize when a person has a mental illness based on the offense report. And then as the statute allows, my attorneys will file suggestions of incompetency whenever they're appropriate. We'll work with Dr. Weiss in Northwest Texas and the Pavilion and Texas Panhandle Centers and anybody else who wants to work with us to get those people the help they need and stop the endless cycle of crime. Crime itself is an antisocial personality disorder. We have to fix that.
Okay, now we have just enough time to do 30-second closing statements. Because Mr. Denny started with his opening statement, Mr. Simms will start with his closing statement. Mr. Simms.
Thank you, and I want to address just exactly what he said is what's in the protocol. Ladies and gentlemen, the District Attorney's Office handles serious crimes and makes serious decisions that affect people's lives every day. I've done that for 30 years. So the people in my office make those decisions. We affect people's lives. Some of those decisions are life and death decisions. You need someone experienced that's getting good results. I have a proven record, a proven leadership, and using my common sense. I would ask for your vote on March 31st.
Mr. Denny.
Those people he talks about that are committing very serious crimes and that are accused of those crimes, I've sat next to. I've talked to their families. I've talked to the victims' families. One of the things that strikes me is that 6 out of 24 cases last year ended in a not guilty verdict. Those people can't get their lives back. They were prosecuted without reason. The jury said not guilty, but the public opinion can't be taken back. We need to fix that.
Thank you, Mr. Denny. Okay, we are out of time. Seems like I've said that word time quite a bit today. I'd like to thank our candidates and our journalists for being with us. And most importantly, I want to thank our audience and remind you all that you can vote early through February the 26th. Election Day is March 1st. If you want to see any or all of this forum again, you can go to panhandlepbs.org or to any of the websites of any of these journalists here tonight with us. Thanks again, and please vote.